scientists, we're damaging our gut. We're feeding the bad microbes in the gut, and ultimately leads to things like leaky gut, which I've seen in my practice show up as mental health issues, sometimes new, but they also can show up as skin conditions and joint pains and so many other things.
I'm excited to talk all things brain food and specifically nutritional psychiatry, which is sort of like a big topic for you. And you're unique in that you're a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, but you're also a chef, which is super cool. And you have a specialty in nutrition. Yeah. How did you come to synthesize all of those seemingly disparate areas of expertise?
Thanks for the question, Max. Hindsight is 2020. I would like to say that I followed things that I love to do. But I think there were two very big moments in my life and my career which brought these intersections together. I went to culinary school because I loved to cook and I wanted to learn more for myself, just to improve that. And I studied nutrition because I had a patient early on, kind of a meek psychiatry resident prescribing medications. And this patient yelled at me, thinking that I had caused him to gain weight after taking Prozac. And while I was new to prescribing, I knew that it wasn't that just by looking at the data. But he also had this massive cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee in his hand. And something intuitively caused me to ask him, well, what did you put in that bowl? And when I was able to break down for him the empty calories he was consuming, I saw his eyes light up. Like, he actually said, I can do something about this. But I understood in that moment, it was a very big aha moment for me because I realized if he knew that, he could act. There was an action step. It wasn't just providing information about a healthy diet. It was, this is something you can do. We grew to have a great therapeutic relationship. He needed medication, much lower dose, and he lost weight over time. So I saw that in action, and I realized that by a patient, a client, someone having the information, how differently they could interact. A second moment in my life, which was also an aha moment, when I was unexpectedly diagnosed with cancer. And I therefore unexpectedly became my own test subject. I found myself on the first day of my chemotherapy treatment really unboundedly anxious. Not able to sleep well. And I partly was afraid because I knew the side effects of all the medications I was about to face. And on the morning of my treatment, I was trying to really ground myself, calm myself down. And I realized, why am I not doing what I tell everyone else in my practice to do, which is lean into what I'm eating, lean into all the holistic sort of integrated care that I do. And that was the missing piece. And I started to do much more of that. And so the way that I handled my own treatment became the blueprint for what I did in my clinic thereon after. Working in a very integrated way, but also paying attention to those small details that we sometimes lose when you're eating a healthy meal or whatever it is. So those two moments really pull together these different experiences and training to make the work for me to become my mission.
Wow. And when was it? Was it with that first patient that you made the connection between food and mood?
I realized that there was a connection there to what was happening with his weight. And I realized interpreting the information was very powerful to a patient, that he could create not just an awareness, but an actual action step. Then as I began to watch this more and study more about nutrition, I realized there was this unfolding science, right? The science of the gut microbiome, the science that we, in fact, are what we eat, but we were not really paying attention to that. And therefore, nutritional psychiatry began to be something that I wanted to talk more about in the world. And then I had the opportunity, through support of my hospital, to really start a clinic and start to do the work.
Just amazing. Just to paint the picture for listeners and viewers, just to illustrate how far we've come in this field. Yeah. When you were going to medical school, and training your specialty, which is psychiatry, was there the sense, like, were you taught that food can have an impact on the way that we feel, on anxiety, depression, brain fog, etc.?
No, this is a very nascent field. And if you think about the science, Hippocrates eons ago made that connection between disease and the gut and the brain. But It really is newer science, the science of the gut microbiome. I think between 2012 and 2017, there was something like 13,000 articles in connecting that science. But along with that, the connection around food and nutrients came. And I don't want to overstate it. It's still evolving, but the connection is there. And what I feel, Max, is, we're not asking you to do anything that's rocket science. These are simple habit changes and very powerful ones. So unless you have an allergy or an intolerance, why not think a little bit differently about how we're eating? We can all improve a little bit.
I couldn't agree more.
So,
So if the person listening to this wants to, at least with regard to nutrition, do whatever is within reach for them to do to attain spectacular mental health,
yeah.
what are the kinds of foods that they should be eating?
Well, I like people to think about it in the following way, and then we go through this into the specifics. I like to people to think about it as SEW. The first tip I have is swap. So think about something during this time that you've kind of stocked up, maybe the cookies in your kitchen, whatever it is. We can always swap at least one habit, and the fact that you've identified it's a habit you want to swap means that you've realized it's a little bit of an issue for you. Maybe you're seeing it as a waistline issue, but reality, I think you and I both know, it's really much less about the food on your plate today or the number on your scale tomorrow. It's the overarching pattern of what we're doing. So swap one thing that it is not the healthiest for you. Number two is eat something differently. So maybe you want to include fermented foods. Maybe you want to tap into your spice cabinet, which is no calorie, salt-free, sugar-free, great way to improve flavor, but also boost the brain benefits. And the W is for walk, but walk represents movement of some kind. It also is that broad idea of a holistic model, mindfulness, gratitude practices, time outdoors, but movement in some way and integrating more methods to feel better. So start with those three things because they will actually tap into different things. And then thinking about how you're feeling, go into specific foods. So what I do, and this is your brain on food, is say for the condition of anxiety, I talk you through the science behind the stuff that you really want to cut back on and avoid specifically for anxiety, but the things you can embrace and add to. Because rather than tap into the diet dilemmas, the food wars, and the food restrictions we tend to get into in this country, how bountiful is it to have many things you can choose from?
Oh, it's amazing.
Right? The fiber from, simple things like vegetables and fruit that we ignore. We worry about our protein grams, but 1 in 10 Americans eat enough fiber in their diet. So knowing that, we can start to rework their nutritional psychiatry treatment plan or just their food plan, how they're eating.
Love that. I want to talk a little bit about carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Within the context of anxiety, because we've talked about, I think, on this podcast in the past, the value of minimizing glycemic variability or
Yes.
minimizing glycemic excursions by reducing high glycemic foods, sugar sweetened beverages and
Yes.
things like that. But I think that what we haven't necessarily talked about enough, and I'm curious to hear you unpack this, is also the fact that eating too few carbohydrates
Yes.
can trigger anxiety because it's essentially a stress on the body.
Yes.
So what is your take on the appropriate amount of carbohydrates? How can we sort of determine that for ourselves, et cetera?
And I'm glad you said determined for ourselves because we are understanding with more and more that we see patients, we see the work, we see the research that is highly individualized. So that's much more personal, like you and I might have a very different requirement. We also know that metabolic health is so linked now to mental health, and that's where carbohydrates come in. For the average individual who may have maybe taken medications in mental health, and many of the medications do cause weight gain, they might have to be even more careful about maybe, a therapeutic carbohydrate ratio of what they're eating. And they may want to work with a clinician or dietitian or nutritionist around that because any deviation from the lower glycemic and the more complex carbohydrates will affect their weight. But for the most part, a good guidance is make sure that you're eating the food groups unless you have an allergy or intolerance and go for the higher quality carbohydrates which are the complex carbohydrates. Just don't eat a ton of them. I think you and I would agree that the food pyramid of school days is completely, turned around. And countries like Denmark have an inverted food pyramid, incidentally, which is kind of cool. So those servings at the bottom of the triangle with the 8 to 11, I think, servings of what was essentially carbohydrates no longer works. We know that. But that doesn't mean we need to exclude them entirely. So I say, whole grains and healthy whole grains, expanding, your repertoire beyond, say, what people generally know, things like oatmeal, which people understand, but things like chia seeds, chia pudding, things that also have fiber and protein, and you can make easy recipes with. That being said, the thing I want to share is that with simple carbohydrates, they kind of go through our system like a rocket. And if you're eating that donut for breakfast, by the time you get to your desk or you drive to work or commute, you need a second or third donut and much more because you're hungry. And people mistake that for, the same as eating vegetables or carrot or an omelet with lots of veggies in them. And so I actually appreciated something you said about eggs recently because they're really a great protein. And rather than get into why eggs are not good, there's so many sources that are brain-rich nutrients and good for you. So there's a great example. Add the protein, have the appropriate carbs with that, a whole grain version. And, if you are struggling a little bit with your waistline, then you've got to be careful about the types of carbs you eat.
Yeah. Is it correct to say that carbohydrates, to the rapidly digested ones, the ones that act like, as you said, the rocket fuel,
yeah,
that those can actually drive anxiety?
Yes.
And is it because when they, after the insulin
this insulin spike
clears
yes.
the glucose right from the blood, then it can basically send you hypoglycemic. Is that the mechanism?
That's one of the mechanisms. So people have the simple carb, they have that blood sugar spike, and then they have almost no whole grain, no complex carb in their gut that can stay the longer amount of time and have them be satiated. That can show up in anxiety as a feeling of hypoglycemia and jitteriness. The other thing that I feel we overlook is if you have say you have a nice whole grain breakfast with a good source of protein and fat. So say you have eggs, you have lots of veggies in that, and it's going to break down in your system and get digested much more slowly. So I always say fiber is your friend in anxiety because you remain on an even keel. And you make it through maybe your mid-morning snack, or you even make it through lunch because you're satiated. And that plays a big part of it as well. The other thing that tends to happen with anxiety is people are eating and consuming things that worsen anxiety and they don't realize it. One big trap is artificial sweeteners that people don't realize, even ones that are more natural. Unfortunately drive anxiety, and that's what the research has shown. They disrupt the gut. They really don't do good things to our bodies. But often someone is saying to me, I want to come off soda, so I'm drinking the diet soda. And I'm having that in the morning, or I'm, the other one is caffeine. There's nothing wrong with consuming coffee, but caffeine is not for everyone. So they drink a little bit of coffee, their heart is racing, their pulse is racing, they're feeling extremely anxious. It's not for them. And that's where we need to tap into body intelligence.
Yeah. Also, the whole caffeine on an empty stomach, I think can be problematic. And I'm guilty of in the past I used to drink black coffee on an empty stomach.
Yeah.
And I've shared that, but I think that when you're able to add a little bit of fat to it to just blunt or slow the infusion of caffeine, I think that will do a lot better for people that are prone to jitters.
The other thing to remember in the morning is that some people haven't had enough water to drink, and when they're dehydrated, that can I've seen it precipitate panic, and I've seen people wake up really anxious. So with anxiety, and individuals who are struggling with that, I ask them to drink a glass of water in the morning. So they go through some sort of practice, which I try to help them develop if they don't have one, so that they don't jump out of bed with their heart racing and that feeling of dread, which often someone with anxiety will talk about, and that they have more of a pattern to easing themselves into the day. But part of that is water, because dehydration can also make them feel super anxious, and add to that not the best diet, it can be it can be disastrous for anxiety.
Wow, electrolyte depletion as well, correct?
Correct. Electrolyte depletion, dehydration. Maybe they've had a glass of wine the night before. Maybe they've had, one too many cocktails the evening before, and their body suffering from an imbalance of electrolytes. But because of the alcohol, they're feeling a little bit more jittery. And, hydrating, eating appropriate foods can help to fend that off a little bit too.
Fascinating. So, and then on the other side of the carbohydrate spectrum, just because I feel like it's important to mention, people will usually interpret that high glycemic load, refined sources of carbohydrates are no bueno. Some people I think will interpret that as like that low carb is like the best way to go. But is it also the case that eating too few carbohydrates can drive anxiety?
I've seen that happen clinically. And what tends to happen is that those individuals might fall into, there's, as you know, Max, there's sort of neuroscience around lower carbohydrate diets for certain conditions in mental health. And a few
Yes.
case studies out there which have proven to be potentially useful. I think the science is following, the research is following. But I think what we don't want to do is that eat this, not that mentality. And what I mean is let's give up carbs completely and eat so few that there's very little in our bodies. And this is where the nuances in nutritional psychiatry are important, because I consider myself, and it took me a while to get there because I had to see enough of this clinically, to be diet agnostic. So if you're on a keto diet, I'm going to help you understand the things that are going to help your anxiety and the foods that will help you, and the amount that maybe you should be eating a little bit of carbs here and there, but the right ones. There are carbohydrates in vegetables. People
Yeah.
don't think about that. So there are ways to still do that in a healthy way rather than just leave them out. Because you're right, when our bodies are not satiated, that's one of the reasons we also feel anxious. And people who go to these extremes can sometimes present with those conditions.
Yeah, it all comes back to the idea that there's no such thing as a one size fits all diet. You might be on a
Yes.
ketogenic diet to be treating certain neurologic
Like
conditions,
seizures.
epilepsy. Yeah, exactly. But on the other side of the equation is that what I think an interesting and ultimately important way to think about very low carbohydrate diets, ketogenic diets, is that they are essentially starvation mimetics. You're driving your body into a starvation state,
Right.
to the point at which it will create ketones, right?
Yes. Ketone
While
bodies,
still being able to eat. So it's a mimetic for this starvation state, which is ultimately stress on the body. Like the body doesn't like to be in a starvation state.
It is, yes.
And so if you're doing that and then you're compounding other stress, right? Like from work or throwing fasting into the mix or vigorous exercise,
Right.
like it's just like stress compounding and compounding and compounding.
No, you're right about that. And I also feel like, individuals who follow ketogenic diet will very often share, you do it in this way and this is how to be healthy on the diet. You don't do it if you're not tolerating it. You don't do it if you feel sick and unhealthy. And they will tweak things, in order to sustain that over time. I'm not entirely sure yet that it should be a lifelong diet. I think people could do it for periods of time. And personally, I think because our bodies are so unique, and especially our microbiome is so unique, that we should be switching it up. So I think that type of restriction can feel unhealthy. And I've seen people almost get sick, beyond just the people, talk about keto flu and things like that. It's beyond that. They actually just don't feel well. And more than one individual has come back and said, I brought back carbohydrates, but I followed healthy carbohydrates and that felt better.
I love that. You mentioned actually a few times healthy, quote unquote, healthy whole grains. In the modern world, modern supermarket, like what does that even look like?
That's a good one. I think it comes a little bit from my culinary life. I like grains like spelt. I like things like farro, barley. Barley is higher glycemic, but you can use a little bit of barley in like a mushroom soup and make it really yummy and hearty and more satiating for you. I like amaranth, so I think we just need to expand a little bit out of what people, tend to think of as rolled oats or, steel cut oats, because there are also some glycemic issues with those. And I do understand from what I read and the research that they can produce, eating them in moderation is fine, but maybe not have that be your everyday food.
Yeah. I eat a very, I would say, low grain diet, but not necessarily a very low carbohydrate diet.
Yeah.
I eat lots of tubers. Are those,
Yeah.
if you're eating lots of tubers, vegetables, whole fruits,
That's great.
that's great.
So Max, you are not, an individual that has a struggle with. I would think that you're struggling with metabolic health. So if it was someone who's coming to my practice and struggling with some psychological issues, but also some weight issues, I wouldn't necessarily say tubers first. I would probably start them off with, sulforaphane-rich veggies, which are going to be low calorie. They can flavor up with spices, but they can be filling for them, along with healthy proteins and fat. So a balanced diet. You're healthy, you're active. It's very different from someone who may be struggling with other issues. So tubers are completely fine. With someone in my practice, I wouldn't necessarily go to white potatoes or sweet potatoes or tubers first, but I might bring and introduce those later on.
Why not? Because they would seem too healthy for somebody who hasn't cultivated that palate, or
no? Because I think the glycemic index would be slightly higher than starting them on, say, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, which they could eat good servings of them. Even leafy greens, more fibrous, lower calorie, but satiating to someone who is used to eating a slightly less healthy diet and far fewer vegetables. And then absolutely work them in or have them less often during the week.
Yeah.
But, as a patient once told me, vegetarian diet, Dr. Naidoo, is pizza and Coke. So you got to be specific with me. I always remember that.
Yeah.
So
Oreos are plant-based.
Oreos are plant-based, correct.
What are some of your favorite fibrous veggies?
I love the sulforaphane-rich veggies. So I love the cruciferous, sort of the cauliflower, the Brussels sprouts, the cabbage, just because you can flavor them up, and they lend themselves to so many different spices and interesting dishes that you can make. And then I love things like zucchini and summer squash. I love tomatoes, the rich in lycopene. They're just that's an easy win. So those are some of the things I lean into, and I actually love leafy greens. I get a lot of eye rolls in my practice for this, but leafy greens are rich in folate, and low folate is associated with low mood. These studies are actually, far older than when the gut microbiome science came through. So these are things we can. To me, these I call them nutritional psychiatry no-brainers. It's like no-brainer to eat your leafy greens because it's just going to build up the folate levels in your body.
Wow. Talk about why. What is it better to? Somebody listening to this might run out and go get a folic acid supplement, which is like synthetic folate, right? Mm-hmm. Is it better to reach for food?
I always feel food first, and the reason I feel that is there are two things. We know that we don't live in a perfect world, so supplementation is definitely necessary, but we can't out supplement a bad diet. So you can, in an appropriate situation, maybe you're deficient. Your doctor's done some blood tests. Maybe you need that. For example, pregnant women, across the United States will need a folic acid supplement. But if you're just the average person trying to up your game in terms of how you're eating, why not have, whether it's spinach or arugula, kale, anything that's green, the greener the better. Challenge yourself. If you have a farmer's market, try watercress, try the dandelion greens, just be experimental with it and make it fun. Because it's easy to do, much easier than a powder you add to something. Maybe you need to do that when you're traveling or for part of what you do. But there are ways you can get this from food. So I'm a food first person, but there's certain nuances, like certain spices. You do need to maybe take a supplement like saffron. And you might need to supplement something like if you live in the Northeast, many individuals may be low on vitamin D because of the level of sunshine we experience. So test, don't guess.
That test, don't guess.
Yeah.
I love that. What are some other ways that fibrous veggies and in particular dark leafy greens benefit the brain? Like how you mentioned folate, which is great, but how else do they benefit?
So they're rich in prebiotic fiber. And one of the reasons that helps is through that gut-brain connection. By providing the gut microbes with prebiotic fiber, they are nurturing the gut microbes. And then the breakdown products that are formed are the healthier products like short chain fatty acids, which we need to really help with that cycle of better brain health. When we are leaning towards processed, ultra processed foods, junk foods, and highly sugared foods, most people think of those because they understand that number on the scale will go up, the waistline will be an issue. But we have to we have to walk ourselves back from that, because what's also happening is we damaging our gut. We're feeding the bad microbes in the gut, and those breakdown products are toxic. The toxic breakdown products damage that single cell lining in the gut, and ultimately leads to things like leaky gut, which could I've seen in my practice show up as mental health issues, sometimes new, but they also can show up as skin conditions and joint pains and so many other things, because the gut microbes and the functions that they really engage in are so related to the rest of our body. Because even though medicine in the United States is all specialty based, I think we're slowly starting to understand through lifestyle medicine, functional medicine, and nutritional psychiatry that it's all connected. So the specialties need to be speaking, but the gut microbiome is just sort of like the connector to all these other systems in the body. So we need to have a better sense of things.
Yeah, the gut microbes are connected to every system.
To everything, including in the mouth, right? Like the oral microbiome.
Which I love to talk about. Yeah. They're just like waiting, like they're looking at like medicine, like Western medicine, like we're waiting for you to catch up. We're already influencing the brain, the joints, the skin, all these other organ systems. Yeah. Who'd have thought? 30 years ago, right?
Right. Who would have thought? And it's sort of, I love the fact that, the science around the microbiome is going to open up new options in mental health. Like I care deeply about the greater mission in mental health, and using what I love about nutritional psychiatry, Max, is, have you ever seen people who are watching for the Food Network and they don't know how to cook? They may not even have a pan in their kitchen. Food is just an easy conversation starter to a much deeper conversation around their mental well-being, which is difficult for a lot of people, So I think it's a way to get that conversation going and then to use that as a mechanism to help people.
I agree. Couldn't agree more. Okay, we've talked about the produce. We've covered the produce section. Herbs and spices you mentioned are a low-calorie, low-sodium way of boosting the flavor of your food, turning single ingredients into food. What are some of your favorite spices?
So some of my favorite spices are turmeric with a pinch of black pepper. And we now know that, the paprine in black pepper activates the curcumin to make it about 20 times more bioavailable to the body and brain. So easy hack. And if you don't cook, adding it to tea, a soup, or smoothie is just easy to start using it, a quarter teaspoon a day, pinch of black pepper and start going from there. You can also make a marinade. You can add it to veggies with other spices. Chili peppers, have capsaicin. Capsaicin helps with energy. So this is a good one to add, and it adds spice if that's something you enjoy. There are also things like parsley, mint, Mexican oregano, which have luteolin, and those have been shown in research to help brain fog. So there's all these little things that you can almost have. Your spice cabinet can be part of your armor for your mental well-being. And we often kind of overlook that, and we tend to go to the sugar canister, which is typical in our kitchens. But we should be thinking about these other options.
Absolutely, and yeah, I think knowing how to wield a spice and an herb in the kitchen is so important.
Yeah. And here's something that's easy. If you can get the fresh herbs, say you have a farmer's market and you can get the cilantro and the mint and the parsley and all of these, just and in the winter, if you don't have access, just use much less of the dried spice, because it's super concentrated when it's an organic dried spice, and you just need much less of it. So that's an easy thing to do. But when you have when I buy fresh herbs, I add them to my salads. I add them, chop them up, and add them everywhere. It's just about being a little bit innovative around making your food more interesting, because I'm a firm believer, and you've written a wonderful new cookbook. I'm a firm believer we don't have to eat healthy in a way that makes it taste like cardboard. It should be delicious.
Absolutely.
and we can't do it that way.
That's one of the silliest misconceptions that there is, in my opinion, that eating healthy has to taste bad or bland. It
Yeah.
absolutely, I mean, the foods that I eat, that I make, are so full of flavor. They're so bold. And that is one of the reasons why I decided to write my cookbook, is to prove that to people.
Right.
Genius Kitchen is packed with, I mean, the flavors of each of the dishes, really bold, really
Right.
like internationally influenced. And yeah, that's,
Love
I mean,
that.
yeah.
I'm waiting to try some of those recipes.
I know, we'll get you some. Lots of, I feel like I use turmeric quite a bit. You mentioned saffron.
Mhm.
That's a really expensive spice, and it's now being sold
Yeah.
as a supplement.
So saffron is a good, it is expensive and you use a little when you cook, right? So one of the things about saffron, it's one of the few places I do say to people, it's an opportunity. If you're really struggling with your mood, saffron has a really good body of evidence around improving mood.
Wow.
And in the studies, they used saffron supplements, so they obviously were able to use a much higher dose than you would in the culinary sense. So that's an opportunity for someone who's, say, having a conversation with their doctor. Um, and many doctors don't study nutrition, so this is an opportunity to go in with some data and say to them, I'm struggling with my mood. Would you be open to us finding the right supplement to try out? And part of it is bringing forth the information, but it's an opportunity there to try something different, along with things that we know have helped mood, like omega-3 fatty acids, which can also be a supplement if needed in with low mood states and even anxiety.
Do you recommend omega-3 supplements?
In certain situations, I do. It mostly depends. Sometimes people prefer to take a supplement because they'll take a supplement, but they don't consume particular seafood, or they've been worried about something they've seen on television that makes them not want to eat the seafood, but they want the benefit of the omega-3. There's a good example of when I might recommend it. Mostly, I'll still try to work with people around, good servings of seafood and things like that. But once in a while, yeah, supplements are fine.
Let's talk about seafood, because seafood comes up again and again in conversations about nutrition for cognitive health, nutrition
Mhm.
for mental health. What kinds of seafood do you recommend?
So I like the omega-3 rich seafood. So, wild sockeye salmon, anchovies, sardines, which are much less expensive ways of obtaining some omega-3s. I like to recommend things like, even this is where cost comes into it, because canned salmon, canned mussels, canned oysters are actually rich in zinc, great for your brain, great brain food. So just having those included in your diet in the way that you think makes sense for you and your family is a good way to go.
I have canned mussels and oysters in my kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah, and it's a great travel snack. It's a great on the go snack for work. If you're busy working from home and can't rustle up an entire huge lunch, it's a healthy brain snack. So I like that you do that, because more people should try it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, you just got to make sure that you're getting it packed in like a healthy oil, like a extra
Correct.
virgin olive oil, ideally. I've
And
seen,
read the type of oil at the back, even if it's labeled extra virgin, because sometimes they sneak in some unhealthy oils depending on the brand, and sometimes packed in water is fine too.
yeah, packed in water. I do, I am aware of the fact that eating fish out of a can, you're probably, who knows, like what endocrine disrupting compounds you're exposing yourself to, from the can's inner lining, which
Mhm.
is, I mean, that's a thing too, unfortunately. But I do think that the benefits outweigh the risks.
The brain benefits outweigh the risks, and I think the best we can do in this conversation around fish, no fish, meat, no, meat or no meat, dairy or no dairy, eggs or no eggs, um, without falling into you can only eat this diet to be healthy for your brain and for your body. I think it's about finding the right plan for the person and finding the best that you have available that's affordable to you and your family. So if you consume meat, consider regenerative farming. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone has access, but consider that. It's a way to try to do that with some health benefits. And not getting into the trap of, all meat or all dairy or all eggs are bad, because I think that's what people struggle with the most, is which way do I go? And I think we have to, I feel in mental health that deep-seated responsibility around providing people with more options than less, because frankly, no one wants to feel restricted and feel like they have to give up more and more in their life. The more almost a buffet of options you have, the better.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I've worked so hard to dispel some of the health myths surrounding animal-based products. It's not
Yeah.
that my diet is exclusively meat. I'm not a
No,
carnivore dieter.
no.
But I think that the harm that comes from the fear-mongering that you sometimes see from even the highest echelons of the nutritional and medical orthodoxy, and especially online with very loud voices, even voices from highly credentialed people,
Right.
fear-mongering animal products. I'm
Right.
like, that's not doing anybody any good.
I agree with that. And my clients talk to me about this all the time because they struggle with should I, shouldn't I? Is it okay? I bought this for my family. And I think the fear mongering is something that we need to really address head on, because individuals who are already having to take that extra step, struggling with their mental health, not feeling good, thinking, how can I find more solutions? New York Times had an article earlier this year of how, despite telehealth, we're short of therapists. So, access in many parts of the country remains a very big issue. Even in big cities where we have mental health resources, people are still waiting months for an appointment to see a doctor or even a therapist. So, the more we can, now that we know there is this connection between food and mental health, the more we can help people even to make some changes while they're waiting to see a doctor becomes important, and the less we confuse them. So if we keep saying you can never eat that, it's going to kill you, and it doesn't help. It makes people more fearful, and then to them a packaged food is safer than a real food. And I've
Yeah.
had people say that to me.
Wow. I know some people that are, or I've heard of people that get that, because in the fitness world, you see pretty often calories are all that matter. Or if you don't see calories are all that matter, you just see this heavily weighted bias towards
Mhm,
calories being the primary needle mover and
mhm.
macros and all that.
Yeah.
And so that's actually I'm aware of some people that have interpreted that, or they've found that the easiest way to track calories is to eat only packaged foods,
Yeah.
because packaged foods have the calories laid out on them, the macros and nutrition facts label.
I've had people say that to me, and then we have to do this little bit around, educating, sharing a little bit of education around food labels, and the fact that there are, and this has been documented, upwards of 250 names, other names for sugar on food labels. Just take that for an example.
It's horrendous.
All right. So what people don't realize, they might think they're seeing a healthy product. And for the most part, some of them are trying, especially the newer products, they're definitely trying to make cleaner products. But you may not realize that 5 items on that ingredient list are sugar. They're just another name, like brown rice syrup is a good one.
Yeah. And highly refined grains are no different than sugar. I mean,
Correct.
even if there is no sugar in it, but it's,
They convert into sugar in the
yeah.
body.
Or maltodextrin is another one of those. It's technically not a sugar,
Yeah.
but it's basically sugar.
Uh, Correct. So some of it is how it breaks down, the using a different name that people don't recognize, but then the impact on your actual body and your gut. So we have to take all of that into account when we make those choices. So even the processed and ultra processed foods, we've got to be careful. We can't avoid them. We probably it's not very hard to live a life and avoid that, especially in the United States. But I think making a conscious choice comes into that, as with all the other food groups.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. When it comes to cooking, what are some of your favorite oils and fats to use? That's a big topic.
It is a big topic. Over time, I've realized that my favorites are extra virgin olive oil for lower temperature cooking or salad dressings. And I like avocado oil, which is neutral and safer at a slightly higher temperature. So if I'm roasting veggies or putting something in the oven, I might use those. I don't mind a little bit of coconut oil for certain things. I like coconut milk. And then a little bit of butter or ghee, which traditionally we use in cooking, but not a ton of it, and not. It's also the method that you use in the cooking, right? You can use a little bit of those fats, but I'm not going to deep fry in these. I'm going to use things like an air fry oven. I'm going to use those quick those quick, newer ways to cook food, get the crispiness without the deep frying factor. So those are some of the ones I use.
Is ghee, because I used to use ghee probably more frequently, and I used to use butter certainly a lot more frequently. But I became sort of aware, I guess you could say, that butter has its chemical composition is different from other dairy fats due to the disruption of the milk fat globule membrane, which is essentially it's essentially a lipoprotein in milk. It's like, like people think of lipoproteins that we have in our own bodies, like LDL, which is a lipoprotein, chylomicrons, lipoprotein. Milk contains these lipoproteins that bind the triglycerides in dairy. And it's been proposed that this is one of the reasons why you see people who eat full fat dairy, their cardiovascular health is better, their metabolic health is better. But butter, I think, has a different way in which it affects the body because that membrane has been disrupted. And so I've cut back a little bit on butter, and then ghee, which is obviously a butter derivative, like it's just made from butter. Ghee, I was noticing some research that shows that the cholesterol, and I don't know how this would play out in terms of like actual outcomes. So maybe this is meaningless, but like the cholesterol in ghee tends to be highly oxidized due to the heat.
It could well be, because you can make ghee at home by just basically cooking off the fat, and that's why the other name for ghee is clarified butter. And when you look at it, actually, it ends up being, unless when you remove it at the right temperature, it ends up being clear. Even since my book, there's been newer science around saturated fats and whether we consume, steak, and what types of red meat we consume. And there's a very seminal paper written early 2020 in the Journal of American Cardiology Association, I think it was. But it was pretty clear that, we need to be rethinking and expanding our understanding of saturated fats, lipoproteins, LDL, HDL. And that really has informed my thinking moving forward to be more inclusive of different types of, say, meat products, animal products, and whether it's a little bit of butter, some ghee here and there. It's not, so a little bit is one way to handle it, and to understand and explain to individuals that there's new evidence that we have that we want to look at. And so it's less about all knowing and more about, this is what we know now. And so, I've started to say to my patients, it's okay to have the steak when you want to. Just think about the quality. I've always said think about the quality, but now it's sort of, you don't only have to lean on lean meats.
I love that. I love that you, as a physician, looked at this new research and have evolved your own perspective on this. Yeah. It's amazing.
And I think I misspoke on the journal. I want to say it was the Journal of American. Oh, anyway, I'll send it to you.
We'll find it.
Yeah, I have the article. It's in my.
Nobody's doubting your your credibility here. Super interesting. No, I feel the same way, and I eat saturated fat in my diet. I'm a big consumer of animal products and the like. So yeah, I love that. It just goes to show you that you tend to see the most dogmatic voices online. Yeah, but science is not dogmatic, right?
Correct. Science is not dogmatic. And the other thing that evolved, Max, and I was subject to that, was that my book was released during COVID. And what happened during COVID is many voices of all different kinds rose on social media. And one of the things that I found, and I got this from direct feedback from people I work with, my patients, is that it got more confusing. And I was at a conference recently, and someone walked up to me and quoted, a really well credentialed researcher, and came to me very scared because she felt that she should give up a certain food group. And I was trying to explain without being offensive to whom she was referring to, and she follows this physician and this group, that you can eat certain amounts of this, you can balance it up, you don't have to. She actually came to me looking fearful, like, do I have to give up? Because from what you're saying, You can eat a balance and you can eat a little bit of this and you can pay attention to the quality. And I said, all of that is true. And it's really up to you to decide um, where you feel the science works for you. Because I can tell you that I think it should be a balance and you can eat some of this. But if your feeling following this group tells you to completely exclude something, I can't decide that for you.
No, but that's dogma. And
that's it.
And there's very likely a bias there that's not being disclosed. That celebrity physician or whatever is probably an activist.
It could be an activist, or sometimes activist organizations are funding their platform.
Right.
So there's a lot of nuances that are not visible to the public. And I think when you're in this world and doing this work, as we do, you get to know it. You get to hear about it and know about it.
It's very clear. It's very clear. I think one of the things that has happened over the past 2 years has been harm has been done to credentialism. And I think social media has only amplified the harm that it's done. And I think that's actually a good thing. The fact that, I mean, people are now skeptical. They have a healthy degree of skepticism that maybe they hadn't had before for people with credentials after their name. Right. I think that's important. I mean, the best doctors that I know are totally comfortable saying, I don't know. Yeah. This isn't my area of expertise. Yeah. They're always willing to have a conversation. Yep. The worst doctors I've ever encountered will say stuff like, well, don't confuse your Google search with my 7 years of medical practice. Right. I think we need both, right? We need both. We need to be able to have a conversation, but to just blindly follow somebody because of their credentials. I think that the days of that sort of blind faith are over.
I agree. And I'm seeing that as well. And I also feel that I want my patients, my colleagues, whoever I'm having the conversation with, to come in informed. So I'm never offended if someone says, I saw the study. In fact, I appreciate it. I'm like, oh, show it to me. Pull it up on your phone. Let's see what it shows and let me help interpret it for you. And if I need time, I'll read it and I'll get back to you.
Love that.
Because I think that the more informed the consumer can be, and especially in this sort of nutrition space, where I'm trying to impact their mental health is key, because there's so many strong opinions about inclusion and exclusion, and people just start to go down the wrong path. And I see it impacting their mental health. So open to the conversation, always being willing to say, I'm not sure, I have to look it up. I do this at presentations. Someone will ask a question, and especially now we've gone back to live audiences, which is fun. And I'll say, I don't have that right now, but this is my email or this is my team's email, and get back, we'll get back to you with an answer, because you don't always know, especially in nutrition sciences. We talked about omega-3 fatty acids. There was a major publication in December of last year from colleagues of mine at the hospital that looked at depression in an older population and showed that omega-3s were not helpful. And I actually quoted that in a lecture that I gave recently. And I said, look, here's the thing. Clinically, I've seen this help more people than not. Not uniformly, but more people than not. Do I disagree with my colleagues and their research? Absolutely not. They have a really upstanding study that they've done. But here's the point about nutritional science. On any day that I say, Max, you can eat these 3 things, I can promise you someone on the internet, someone on social media can quote 3 studies against that. But it's how the studies are nuanced. It's the science behind them. It's what matters to your body, what may agree or not agree with you. It's all of those things. So we just cannot be dogmatic about this anymore. We've got to be inclusive of opinion and careful about the recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, I would, after reading a conclusion like that, omega-3s don't work for older adults, I would ask questions like, well, what else are they eating? Are they eating a diet that's very high in omega-6 dominant seed oils, or perhaps not? If they're not, then maybe that the omega-3s wouldn't have been as important. Are they eating fish regularly?
Right. What are they eating? Yeah.
Where was the study done? Was it done in Norway, where everybody's eating fish all the time? Right. Then the fish oil is
part of their diet.
Yeah, then the fish oil is not going to have any effect, right? Or did they take an urban impoverished community in the United States on a standard American diet? Because I would be really interested to see like what fish oil would do in that population.
Those are great questions, and I will definitely actually send it to you. And I think the point being that it's those nuances you have to look at before you uniformly take that study, or a patient shows it to you, or a colleague shows it to you in discussion and says, "Oh, how come you're recommending this? This is not good according to such and such a study." It's those nuances that matter. It's interpreting it and then finding what the solution is for that person. The next person coming into your office may not do well on an omega-3, but you don't know that until you try. And that's why the integration for me as well of the research and the clinical aspect becomes important.
I agree. So somebody listening to this, we don't have a ton of time left, but somebody listening to this who's struggling with anxiety, depression, brain fog, they're super inspired by your work, as they should be. What's the first step that they should take in their lives? What should they start doing right away?
So an easy thing to do if you want to start adding something different to your food, and this is super simple, is lean into a plant-rich diet, because the fiber, the prebiotic fiber, even the fermented foods that you can use from vegetables and things like miso paste or kimchi, all of that, any one of those things can in fact impact your gut health. And your gut health is now so central to the balance of your mental health. So I always say a happy gut is a happy mood, just to convey that idea. Plus, satiating will give you multiple nutrients that you need. Another simple thing, and I like people to choose from these, start leaning into that spice cabinet. Start cooking with more spices that are flavorful, but also are going to have these brain benefits. And I list them all, and this is your brain on food. Another one is to start to enhance, things like your hydration and other aspects. So some of my recommendations are straight on the food, but I also want people to think about it as a lifestyle change, because nutrition is the number one lifestyle factor that we can change for most of the diseases in the world right now. And so more than ever, the power that we have is at the end of our fork. Before we see our doctors, before we have that conversation, we can make those changes. So adding spices and plant-rich diet, choosing the right types of fats, omega-3s being one of them, lowering the omega-6 oils, processed vegetable oils that we're using. So it's a combination of what you want to include and then being careful of the things you want to cut back on. And those are just some easy ways to stop. Then don't forget to hydrate enough, right? Because low hydration, you can seem anxious. And hydration is super important. Mindfulness, forest bathing, all of this becomes important to our mental health. So
yeah, it's all important. It's not just that diet's the only thing that matters, but it's like it's an area where we have control.
We have control, right? You may live in a part of the world which has less sunshine. So, spending time outdoors may not be that easy, but, we all eat. And so we eat several times a day, and they're just better choices we can make. No one is perfect, but we can do a little bit better, and that includes me.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
Here's what the science shows us. If you have a tall glass of water with a tablespoon of vinegar before a meal, you will cut the glucose spike of the meal by up to 35%.